Hi guys, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today's video is going to be my June TBR. Now for the month of June, I have a very ambitious TBR. This is the first month in what feels like a long time that I'm not traveling. I was also sick for almost the entire month of May, so I'm just hoping to kind of recover, do a lot of reading, and just enjoy relaxing at home. At least that is the plan. There have been so many incredible new releases and also just some titles on my bookshelf I've been dying to get to. But before I dive into the books themselves, first a word from this video sponsor, which is Wraithblade Creative. I'm so excited to be working with Wraithblade Creative once again. They're just such a cool company. Basically, they not only put out some really, truly incredible fantasy titles supporting specifically up-and-coming authors, but they also often have Kickstarters where they make amazing limited edition releases for some of our favorite fantasy books out there. And you might recall that I previously worked with them for their limited edition release of The Sword of Kaigen, one of my all-time favorite fantasy books out there. This time around though, I'm partnering with them to specifically feature the Wraithblade Saga, a very beloved fantasy series that has thousands of reviews and almost a 5-star rating. Yeah, I personally am adding this to my TBR. And because of the recent release of the third book in this series, which is officially available now, Wraithblade Creative is making the first two books only 99 cents for their ebook, which is an absolute steal for an ebook and really presents the opportunity for a marathon. I personally will be taking part as the series sounds amazing. The first book in this series is called Wraithblade, and in it we're introduced to Connor, a penniless drifter who lives in and tries to survive in a cursed wood that is teeming with monsters. At the beginning of book one, Connor hears a mysterious girl scream in the middle of nowhere, and Connor rushes to her aid and ends up being a part of a battle that almost costs him his life. His bravery does not go unrewarded. In the aftermath of this fight, Connor finds himself bonded to the strongest enchantment in the land and attached to the Wraith King, a very powerful undead abomination that presents Connor with god-like powers. And unfortunately for Connor, not only does this magic come with some steep costs, he's now being pursued by people all across the land trying to take this power from him. But Connor is not an easy person to put down, and he will take whoever he needs to basically protect himself and what is his. Again, this series sounds amazing, and this sale, which is on for a limited time only, is a perfect opportunity to grab the first two books for such a great price. Thanks again to Wraithblade Creative for sponsoring this video, and if you guys want to learn more about the Wraithblade Saga, I will of course have links down below in the description, as well as pinned in a comment at the top of the comment section. Without further ado, let's go ahead and dive back into the rest of the video. The first book that is on my list is a very anticipated release for myself and also happens to be my IRL book club pick, which I found to be very convenient. I was thrilled that other people wanted to read this book too, and that is Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. This is R.F. Kuang's first literary fiction novel, though I would say all of our fantasy books are definitely very literary leaning in terms of its topics, themes, and writing style, but this sounds absolutely bonkers. And in this book, we're introduced to two young female writers, June and Athena. They are both a part of the same program. They both kind of released books around the same time, but where June's book never even got a paperback release, Athena quickly became a literary darling. At the beginning of this story, Athena and June kind of run into each other, and Athena witnesses like a tragic accident resulting in June's passing. Athena also finds June's manuscript to her next book, steals it, changes her name to a racially ambiguous name, and then passes the manuscript off as her own, and quickly rises to writing stardom herself. This book just sounds bananas in every way, shape, and form. I've heard really strong early reviews. Obviously, I'm a big fan of R.F. Kuang in general. I really like her writing, and I think conceptually this just sounds so interesting. I'm hoping it's dark and disturbing and satirical, just all the things, you know what I mean? So this will be a must read for the month of June. Obviously I have to read it for my book club, but in general, this would have been on my TBR anyway. Next book that's on my list is Fool's Assassin by Robin Hobb. I started this book in the month of May, but I did not finish it. I read about 150, 175 pages, so clearly I have a good chunk of this book left. Luckily though, I'm actually really enjoying it. I wasn't sure what to expect in terms of the start of this final trilogy, but there was a bit of a time skip, which I honestly loved. This series is really hard to talk about without spoilers, but we are once again going on a quest with Fitz and the Fool, my favorite setup and combination of characters in all of fantasy. The final trilogy, obviously, in Robin Hobb's universe. Robin Hobb is known for her fantastic character work, her writing that will destroy your soul. Like, these are not easy books to read. I also feel like the pacing is just phenomenal. It's all just a fantastic time. I need to finish this, obviously, again in the month of June, and I plan to prioritize it as well. Speaking of series, series I plan to prioritize. The next book I want to read is Age of Death by Michael J. Sullivan. It's the 5th book to the Legends of the First Empire series. The 4th book had an unbelievable cliffhanger, and I just need to know what's going to happen next. I'm also hoping to just finish this entire series by the end of summer so I can jump into Michael J. Sullivan's other series in the fall. I'm loving it so much. It's pastoral, it's classic, but with such great twists. I love all of the characters. I love this ancient human civilization setting, humans versus elves versus dwarves, and just the evolution of human society as a plotline is fascinating. Structurally, the series kind of has 2 distinct trilogies with a time skip between books 3 and 4. So I would say the 4th book was very much a setup for a lot of the events that I'm hoping to read in the 5th book, and then the concluding novel, the 6th book, I also want to read soon. But it's just like, if you love quests, if you love interesting combinations of characters with different abilities, thoughts, and preferences, emotional, it really has it all. It's obviously, being the 5th book, I can't talk too specific, but it's just so good. It's just so good. Next up, I want to read The Book That Wouldn't Burn by Mark Lawrence. This is Mark Lawrence's newest release, and this would actually be my first book by Mark Lawrence, which I find to be very surprising. The Prince of Thorns series of his, I just know wouldn't really be my cup of tea, but I do really want to read Red Sister. But this book is actually set in a dark and mysterious library, and I would say personally, like, library settings, especially fantastical, never-ending, sort of beyond space and time library settings, are especially my favorite. The synopsis of this book is so brief, but it's definitely the setup of like 2 strangers who find themselves inexplicably connected via fate and time in this library, must go on an adventure together. A lot of people also say the synopsis is brief for a very clear reason. And I love what a book is about, like the experience of finding out what the plot is about, just as much as like the plot itself, you know? But it says we follow a boy who's been trapped in the library his entire life, and a girl who's grown up in a tiny settlement out in the dust where nightmares and monsters roam. Again, these 2 characters meet, and I believe go on an adventure together. I'm really excited. I'm hoping this is lyrical. I really don't know what to expect. I wouldn't assume Mark Lawrence's writing style is like very lyrical and mysterious, but you know, sometimes it's about being surprised, and I'm just really hoping I love this. I've heard good things. Next up, I want to read the sequel of The Serpent and the Wings of Night, which the name is escaping me, but I'm sure it's like blah 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 and the blah blah blah. It's called Ashes and the Star-Cursed King. Here's the deal. I picked this book up in May and honestly really enjoyed it. It is a high fantasy vampire-based story. Book 1, we're introduced to our main character, Oria, and she's basically been raised as a human within like the vampire castle by her vampire father, Vincent, her entire life. She's been training to not only be able to protect herself, also trained to basically trust nobody. At the beginning of this book, there are this series of trials put on like once a century by the goddess of all vampires, and the winner gets to have one single wish granted. And Oria, our main character, is entering these trials, and there's only one survivor. Along the way, she meets obviously a very handsome man, and is trying to survive the entire time. And honestly, I found the combination of like fantasy plot and romance and the pacing and the tension to be really, really entertaining. I also felt that the author really balanced like creating and maintaining a really good fantasy plot and romance. It was by no means perfect, but I flew through it. I read it in like 24 hours, and I really want to check out book 2. I'm just looking to be entertained here. So this is also on my TBR. Plus it's available on Kindle Unlimited, which we just in general love to see when that happens. Next up, I have Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. I love Rebecca Ross's writing. It's lyrical and beautiful, and I also really enjoy her romantic plot lines that are present within her fantasy books. I find them to just have this like timeless quality to them, this folklore myth element that I find to just be so romantic, and I feel like this is very much going to house something similar to that. This is set in a world where the gods have risen and are warring once again. We follow one of our main character, Iris, who is just hoping to keep her family together. Her mother suffers from addiction and her brother's on the front lines, and she sees an opportunity within this newspaper to like win a column to kind of help provide for her family. However, though, she has a rival at the same paper, Kit, and they begin writing to each other back and forth, and I think this transforms from rivals to possibly lovers, and I also think they kind of take on this godly force. Again, the setup of this just sounds really, really interesting. I feel like it's going to have this otherworldly quality to it, almost fairy tale, or again like a myth-based story. I personally really enjoy when like love and fate are almost like a weapon against evil powers, if you will, and I feel like that might have an element to this. I don't think this is going to have like ample world building. I think it's going to be a vibe with beautiful writing and interesting like fantasy influence with a great set of characters, but I also could be wrong. The next book that's on my TBR, I've been looking on my shelf for months. It's a longer literary fiction book, but I also feel like it's going to be super, super gripping. That is Age of Vice by Deepti Kapoor. This book centers a crime family in India, and we follow a plethora of characters, all a part of this crime family through many like years of time. It's said to be full of overindulgence and greed and violence, and it's also said to be really enthralling and like a page turner. I personally love crime family plot lines. I also love family sagas, especially ones that take place over a large expanse of time. This is something I say often. And reading through the reviews, I feel like people either love it or like it doesn't land for them. So I'm curious to see how I'm personally going to feel, but I just feel like based on the inputs of this, I could really, really like it. I just want like a messy family, horrible people doing questionable activities, but it be like very interesting at the same time. And I'm hopeful this will be that. So this has been on my shelf since January. I feel like it could be like a really fun and fast-paced summer read. The next book that is on my list is The Story of a New Name by Elena Ferrante. It's basically like a year ago today that I finished reading the first book, which is My Brilliant Friend, and loved it and made my favorite books of the year. So it feels right that I would finally move on to the second book before I forget too much. This is a literary fiction tale. This story is set in Naples in the 1950s, and throughout the entire series, we watch two girls as they become friends at a very young age, watch them grow up and enter different chapters of their life throughout each installment. This series really captures not only an incredibly intimate and dynamic female friendship, but this series also really captures the time period that these young girls turned women have to grow up and live in, from the sexism to the violence to the expectations of the time, and also just the reconstruction after World War II. I loved book one. It was so much more intense than I was expecting. I loved the prose. I loved how Elena Ferrante just kind of throws you in to this community, not really holding your hand and trying to understand all the different connections and rivalries that exist within this town. I especially loved our two main characters, Elena and Lila, and watching them grow up together. And I'm really looking forward to see where the story is going to take off in book two. I feel like it's going to destroy me, but I also feel like it's going to be so worth it, you know? The next book that's on my list is a release that came out at the very tail end of May, and that is Witch King by Martha Wells. This is one of my most anticipated releases of the year, and now that I've read a few books in the Murderbot series, I have really, really high expectations about her return to fantasy. The synopsis of this is also one that just kind of calls out to me. It's also another very, very vague synopsis, which I personally think sets up like a really fun reading experience where you don't really know what to expect, personally. That's just my opinion. But in this story, we follow a very powerful demon named Kai. And after he was murdered, his consciousness has been trapped in like this water trap for many, 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 many years. At the beginning of the book, he kind of reawakens as he realizes that a lesser mage is trying to access his power. And obviously, this is not going to go well for the mage who's attempting to do this. But now that Kai has sort of reawakened, he's trying to figure out, one, why was he imprisoned in the first place? Who killed him? What's going on now? And I think that's kind of where the story takes off. The synopsis really just feels like the beginning, the setup of the story, and wherever the story unravels from there is for us to find out in the book, and I'm curious. I love magic. Is it weird to say that I love demons? I don't know, but I feel like he's also going to possibly be a gray moral character to kind of center this book, and I'm just so curious about it. The last book that's on my June TBR is The Dance Tree by Karen Millwood Hargrave. This author also wrote The Mercies, another historical fiction book I really enjoyed. She has this habit of finding like a really specific event in history that is strange and also like very tragic, and then building a story around that and creating a lot of intensity. This book is set in France in the 16th century, and it centers around a woman who basically begins dancing nonstop in the square. And she basically starts this frenzy of other people joining in the dance, and it goes on for days, and it basically causes like utter chaos within this town. The town council thinks it has something to do with like witchcraft. Particularly in this book, we actually follow a young woman who lives on the outskirts of this town, and she is really pregnant. She's about to give birth when the events of this frenzied dance begin to start. Just something about the setup and the concept of this sounds so interesting to me, and this actually happened. I mean, the story itself probably didn't happen, but the event of this frenzied dancing in 1518 in a small French village does. And that at the root of the story just fascinates me, and I need to know what is going to happen in this. Alrighty guys, that is my very ambitious June TBR. Please let me know down below some books you hope to get to this month, as I would love to know. And again, big shout out to Wraithmark Creative for sponsoring this video. Again, I will have a link to the Wraithblade Saga if you want to learn more and check it out. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you soon with another one soon. Goodbye!